Welcome back to the deep dive. We take compelling source material and we'll really try to give you the deepest possible understanding of what's inside. Today, we're definitely strapping in for a pretty high-stakes discussion.
That's putting it mildly.
We're analyzing sources that dive into this really explosive intersection of current geopolitics, specific individuals, and, believe it or not, ancient religious prophecy. Our focus. Jared Kushner and the Abraham Accord.
Exactly. And the source material we're looking at today, it takes a perspective that's, let's say, far outside the usual diplomatic analysis.
Yeah.
It uses this intense eschatological lens, end times prophecy, to ask a question that, well, it's definitely going to raise some eyebrows.
Which is?
Is Jared Kushner a potential candidate for the Biblical AntiChrist?
Wow.
So our whole deep dive here is going to be a really careful, impartial look at these claims and the intricate prophetic framework the source uses. It's mostly based on specific readings of Daniel and 2 Thessalonians. Just to be clear, we're here to dissect what the sources claim, not to endorse any of it.
Absolutely. And that initial question is, well, it's the absolute shocker, isn't it? I mean, you look at the political landscape, Kushner's seen mostly as this successful deal maker. So what attributes does the source material even use to put him in the running for such a dramatic end times role? It feels like an extraordinary leap.
It is a huge leap. But the source builds its case, by detailing his unique profile, his achievements, and then positioning them very precisely against this backdrop of Orthodox Jewish eschatology. We're talking about the specific end times beliefs held by many ultra-Orthodox religious leaders in Israel.
Okay, let's unpack that profile first then. The source spends a lot of time establishing his credentials, not really as a politician, but more as this influential insider. What makes him so unique geopolitically, according to this material?
Well, first, it points to his unique sort of built-in credibility within some really critical circles. The writer suggests he's Orthodox himself and highly respected by the Sanhedrin.
Which, for listeners who might not follow Israeli religious politics closely, that's essentially the highest religious court, right? The Council of 70 Elders.
Precisely. And that connection is seen as vital in this framework. Secondly, his direct access, his direct ear to President Trump, being his son-in-law and senior advisor, gave him this authority that went way beyond any elected or, appointed role.
Right. That's where the source really seems to focus, emphasizing he achieved all this diplomatic success without being elected or having that traditional diplomatic background. They basically call him a living example of it's not what you know, but who you know. His power came from proximity.
Exactly. And this proximity, this influence, it leads straight to what the source sees as the primary, absolutely non-negotiable requirement for the biblical Antichrist within their specific interpretation. They're adamant the Antichrist cannot be Muslim.
Okay, why not?
They argue the Orthodox Jews who are waiting for their Messiah would just never accept a Gentile or a Muslim figure for that role. They expect the son of David.
Wait, hold on. The son of David. That's a massive distinction because, a lot of popular Western ideas about the Antichrist suggest he comes from like a revived Roman Empire or maybe somewhere else entirely. What's the evidence the source uses for this very specific focus on Jewish lineage?
They argue the individual must be, genetically speaking, Jewish, and specifically from the bloodline of King David and King Solomon. The reasoning is that Israel's coming messianic golden age is supposed to mirror the historical golden age, the time of King Solomon.
So rebuilding the temple, expanding borders.
Exactly. Establishing Israel as the center of global commerce, religion, politics. And the source argues only a figure with the right lineage, accepted by the Sanhedrin, could credibly play that part for them.
If that's the criteria, a powerful Orthodox Jewish figure with unprecedented access, yeah, that definitely narrows the field. But here's where it gets really interesting, maybe even a bit strange.
Yeah.
The source pivots from geopolitics to what they see as like circumstantial numerical evidence.
Yes, the detail that the source treats as a, let's say, compelling coincidence.
Yeah.
We're talking about that 2007 real estate deal. Kushner Companies bought that big 41-story tower in Midtown New York.
And it's the numbers involved that they really highlight, right? Aggressively so.
Absolutely. The cost was reported as $1.8 billion. The source immediately flags this, analyzing 18 as 3 times 6, linking it to 666.
Okay.
And then, of course, the address of the building itself was 666 Fifth Avenue.
I get the symbolic weight those numbers carry in prophetic circles, but why put so much emphasis on a real estate deal from years before his diplomatic career even started?
Because within this kind of eschatological framework, these sorts of coincidences aren't seen as random. They're viewed as maybe fingerprints of some guiding spiritual force, almost like proof that this individual has been prepared, perhaps divinely or, in this view, Luciferianly prepared for a role. It suggests he's marked, even if he doesn't know it.
Now, before we get to the Abraham Accords, the source offers this important nuance about his potential role. He's either the final figure, the Antichrist himself, or he could be like a John the Baptist figure, setting the stage. What's this rapture reset they mention?
That's a really essential distinction they make. If he's the setup man, he's basically paving the way for the real Antichrist, who only appears after this event called the rapture reset, which they interpret as the moment believers are removed from the earth. The source suggests Kushner is acting, astutely and efficiently to create the global conditions, especially this peace agreement, that the eventual figure will just inherit.
So he's preparing the stage, handing over the keys later.
Essentially, yes. Handing over the keys to Jerusalem and the temple, potentially.
Okay, that sets up our next section perfectly. Let's pivot from the man's background to his biggest achievement, the Abraham Accords. Normalizing relations between Israel and several Arab nations,
Yes.
Huge deal.
A massive, incredibly complex diplomatic effort. And what makes it even more remarkable, according to the source, is the unofficial nature of his role. The source really views Kushner as the architect, the undeniable architect, of this whole 20-point peace plan involving Israel, Hamas, Egypt, Qatar, the UAE, Saudi Arabia, Turkey, the U.S.
Now, that's a lot of players, many historically opposed.
Exactly. And it was secretive, high-stakes diplomacy, often happening behind the scenes without him holding a formal, traditional diplomatic title.
And the source material explicitly says this kind of orchestration, bringing enemies together like that, is not normal. They even describe it as biblical in one's estimation. Why attribute such, almost supernatural significance to political deal-making?
Because the result aligns so perfectly, in their view, with a key prophecy, Daniel 9.27. This prophecy talks about a covenant supported by the many being strengthened or confirmed. So the collective signing on to this peace framework, this Abraham shield, as the source calls it, is seen as embodying that specific verse. The argument is bringing together such different nations under one agreement takes a level of influence that, well, maybe transcends normal politics.
I want to zoom in on that interpretation of Daniel 9.27. Who exactly are the many, or Elohim, in this context, according to the source?
Right, and this is a really deep theological distinction the source makes. It shifts the focus away from, say, global politics or the UN and back towards Israeli religious authority. The source strongly suggests the many, Elohim, doesn't refer to many nations.
No.
No. Instead, it refers to the many rabbis who make up the Council of the 70 Elders of Zion, the Sanhedrin.
Wow, okay, so the crucial point is that this covenant, to fulfill the prophecy as they see it, must be solidified with the explicit backing of Israel's highest religious authority.
That completely reinforces the idea you mentioned earlier. This whole framework is centered squarely on Orthodox Jewish messianic expectations, not necessarily Western Christian ones.
It really does.
And what's also fascinating is their distinction between creating a covenant and strengthening one. They read Daniel 9.27 not as someone creating a brand new deal, but as someone strengthening or solidifying an existing agreement.
So, Abraham Accords 1.0 under Trump laid the groundwork.
Exactly. That was the foundation. But Kushner, potentially with a future Abraham Accords 2.0, is seen as the one who confirms it, strengthens it, makes it robust and lasting. He solidifies the structure of peace.
Okay, this all leads us straight into our third section, which feels like a massive pivot. We've been talking politics, diplomacy.
And now we head into the deep spiritual end.
Right. The source shifts entirely to the deeper eschatology, false peace, and this concept of the hybrid. Let's start with the goal of Kushner's peace plan. What was the intended aim on the surface?
Well, on the surface, the aim looks pretty laudable, right? Ensuring Israel's permanent peace and security, and doing it through practical steps. Demilitarizing Gaza, using international peacekeeping forces, promising massive economic prosperity for everyone involved. It looks like a political masterstroke for stability.
But the spiritual critique from the source is that human diplomacy, just treaties and negotiations, is fundamentally flawed when dealing with the Israeli-Palestinian issue. Is that it?
Correct. The source absolutely insists this conflict is, at its core, a spiritual struggle over the covenant land. And any geopolitical plan that ignores this religious reality is not only destined to fail, but potentially worse. It sets the stage for divine judgment.
And this is where the concept of false peace comes in.
Directly from 1 Thessalonians 5.3. When they shall say peace and safety, then sudden destruction cometh upon them. The source argues the Accords, however celebrated they are globally, represent humanity trying to secure lasting peace and security without acknowledging the religious claims, what they call YHVH's covenantal claims over the land, and, crucially, over the Temple Mount.
So for the source, this piece is kind of a necessary deception, setting the stage for the real crisis.
That seems to be the argument, yes. It creates the illusion of stability before the sudden destruction.
Okay, now we really have to tackle the most esoteric claim here, the nature of the Antichrist as a hybrid.
Yeah.
You need to walk us through this one slowly because we're leaving political commentary way behind and entering like DNA and spiritual genetics territory. The source talks about a seed war.
I know, this is where we definitely leave the maps behind and enter some really speculative theology. The source argues the end times conflict is ultimately a seed war that involves the very DNA, the genome of humanity. To get this, we first have to look at how they view the person of Christ.
How does Christ fit into this hybrid idea?
Well, the source argues Jesus himself was a hybrid, described using the theological concept of the hypostatic union, 100% God and 100% man. Perfectly divine, perfectly human, the perfect seed, if you will.
Okay.
So if Jesus was that, then Lucifer's seed, the Antichrist, the son of perdition, must also be a hybrid. It has to be the perverse, the imperfect inversion of Christ. Since Lucifer is called the father of lies, the source posits the Antichrist will literally have Lucifer as his father, making him some kind of mixture of demonic and human essence.
Whoa. So they're not just talking about spiritual influence. They mean actual genetic something, lineage.
They absolutely seem to be implying that. They even link this idea back to historical hybridization concepts. Ancient stories of fallen angels breeding with human women, producing the giants of old, the Nephilim.
Right. Okay.
And then they jump forward, connecting it to modern things like UFO abductions, suggesting these are all part of this ongoing seed war, this attempt to corrupt the human genome.
Goodness.
The connection they're making is that the Antichrist will be uniquely suited, physically and spiritually, for his role because of this specific non-human lineage.
That is quite a conclusion to draw from a peace treaty.
Yeah.
But okay, if this hybrid figure is potentially out there already, what's the ultimate constraint? Why hasn't he appeared?
The timing constraint remains absolutely critical in this framework. The Antichrist, called the man of lawlessness, the son of destruction, or Apollo in some interpretations, he only fully reveals himself, according to Thessalonians 2, by seating himself in the temple of God and proclaiming himself to be God. That's the big reveal.
Okay, so let's bring this back around for you, the listener. What's the ultimate takeaway from this really complex prophetic framework the source presents?
Well, the core idea is that Kushner's achievements, things like the Abraham Accords, while they might bring stability and economic benefits on the surface, peace, they might also be unintentionally fulfilling all the prophetic prerequisites for the real Antichrist, the one who, as the prophecies say, will come conquering through peace. So the Accords, in this very specific view, could be just a sophisticated setup, a deception.
Which leads us to that crucial timing mechanism you mentioned, the thing shielding the Antichrist's true identity for now. The source emphasizes 2 Thessalonians 2.3, saying the Antichrist can only be revealed after something called the departure, which they interpret as the rapture and the removal of whatever is currently restraining his arrival. For those not familiar, what does the source mean by the restrainer? What's holding things back?
The source generally interprets the restrainer as the Holy Spirit, specifically working through the church, the body of believers on earth. It's this force that's currently holding back the full manifestation of pure evil and this man of lawlessness. So the idea is once the church age ends, once that restrainer is removed from the earth, then the curtain gets pulled back. The world is blindsided and the Antichrist identity is finally exposed.
Blindsided because everyone was focused on human politics, not the spiritual dimension.
Precisely. Focused on diplomacy, not spiritual restoration, according to this view.
Okay, so here's the final, pretty provocative thought the source leaves us with. The eventual unveiling of this Antichrist figure is presented almost as a judgment against Israel and the world. Why? Because they chose to make a deal with the devil, meaning relying on human diplomacy and political compromise rather than seeking spiritual restoration and acknowledging what the source calls YHVH's claims.
Which definitely raises a big question for you to think about. If this source material is even remotely correct in its basic premise that the conflict is fundamentally spiritual at its core, does that explain why every single historical peace attempt in that region has ultimately failed? Is human brokered peace in that specific region just destined within this prophetic framework to be nothing more than a temporary, maybe even ill-fated false peace, something to mull over?